They didn't catch a cheater. They staged a miracle cure for your boredom and called it justice. A thumbnail screamed, "Caught red-handed," and you did what we all do, you tap. In 60 seconds you saw tears, hotel doors, and a trembling confession that never quite finished a sentence. The music told you how to feel, the cuts told you what to believe, and the comment section built a gallows in record time. But freeze any frame and something twitches, a reflection that shouldn't exist, a clock that lies, a boom mic peaking like guilt. This wasn't truth. It was a trailer with a villain already cast, and by the time the shares hit 1 million, the story had eaten the evidence, the audience had swallowed its own tail. And the only thing actually proven was how quickly a crowd can mistake choreography for conscience. Welcome to the sting that turned The Hunters into the headline. Before the upload, there were rehearsals. Not for the truth. Truth doesn't block the scene or rehearse a doorway, but for the moment you'd gasp and press replay. Rocco mapped beats to retention graphs. Cold opens scandal at 8 seconds. Cliffhanger at 45. Stay for the confession at 1:50. Maya's voiceover would tremble just enough to feel uncoached. Lena would bury the seams so deep you'd forget seams exist. They told themselves it was service journalism with better lighting. They told themselves the audience needed a villain with a face. Somewhere, a spreadsheet argued that moral clarity converts better than nuance, that tears are a higher key or asset than facts. And by the time the first teaser hit, the script, because that's what it was, had already chosen its conclusion. All that remained was to fold reality into shape, like paper over wire, until it resembled a person you could safely hate. Elias was late to the party in which he was the piñata. He finished a small gig, sold 2 vinyls, and checked his phone to find his life renamed. The comments didn't ask for context. They wrote it for him, casting Zoe as saint, Elias as snake, and themselves as jurors who never have to go home. The hotel footage was a corridor with a heartbeat, and the DMs looked like smoke that knew where to rise. He tried to explain to Zoe, but explanation sounds like excuses after 1 million views. He drafted a notes app statement and deleted it. He called a lawyer and hung up. He looked for the original files and found only mirrors. Because when your name turns into a trending topic, you're no longer a person. You're a button people press to feel righteous without getting out of bed. Zoe's world bent at the hinge where private pain meets public theater. Her phone was not a device. It was a siren set to vibrate, pinging pity and rage in alternating bursts. Friends asked if she was safe. Strangers asked for an update. Brands asked if they could support her journey. She scrolled the footage until the corridor etched into her brain like a hallway she'd walked in dreams. Did she believe it? Belief on the internet is a group project. If enough people agree, evidence becomes furniture. Still, memory tugged Elias's calendar, the timing of that gig, the borrowed jacket hanging on a chair that night. Doubt hummed a low, dissonant note under the chorus of certainty. And doubt is dangerous on the timeline. It sounds like betrayal to people who only tune in for applause. Priya didn't click for sport. She clicked like a surgeon checks a pulse. She's seen the choreography before, the breathless intro, the righteous lens, the confession cut just shy of clarity. She laid screenshots like tiles on a table. Reflection patterns, door swing angles, shadows traveling faster than time. Metadata whispered a different city. A witness account matched a teleprompter, not memory. She reached out to a former TruthLoop contractor who answered with a single emoji, the zipper mouth face. Then, another message. It's not what it looks like. She smiled at the cliché, then kept digging, because clichés are where lazy lies hide. If this was a performance, it would unravel on the smallest snap, and if it was the truth, it would hold under pressure. Either way, pressure was coming. By morning, the algorithm had chosen sides and nuance was priced out of the market. Reaction channels clipped the sting into edible squares, each with a punchline and a sponsor. A brand posted a statement about community values, which meant, we saw the numbers and they are scary. Elias's music disappeared from 2 playlists as if curators were disinfecting a surface. In group chats, screenshots became sacred texts, parsed for hidden righteousness. Truth Loop basked in the reflected blaze, cycling through podcasts to repeat the same careful phrasing. We merely presented what we found. That line landed like a parachute sewn from disclaimers. The crowd didn't want careful. It wanted catharsis, and catharsis pays well. Somewhere under the noise, a handful of quiet questions floated. Why does the camera angle change between identical moments? How does the door close twice? But questions don't trend when certainty is on sale. The pylon always needs a chorus, and it got a symphony. Mid-tier creators stitched the hotel corridor with outraged faces, pointing at freeze frames like prophets of pixels. A popular commentator counted alleged inconsistencies, but landed each point on the same conclusion: guilty. Anchors on morning shows smoothed the edges into breakfast television, reducing a life to a segment between weather and recipes. Zoe watched her reflection flicker in a dark phone screen and wondered when grief learned to perform on cue. She typed a message to Elias, not to forgive or condemn, but to ask for a timeline, then erased it, because any text could be screenshotted into evidence against her character arc. When a stranger's thread accused a bystander of enabling, the crowd changed targets without changing speed. Condemnation is a muscle. Once warmed, it doesn't care where it flexes. Priya's inbox turned into a confession booth. Roar. Anonymous tips tumbled in, some useful, many fantastical, each signed with the same vow. I just want the truth. One email came from a former contractor who'd been paid in gift cards and anxiety. Attached were thumbnails of a storyboard, labeled with beat times that matched the viral video to the second. Another message carried a drive linked to raw B-roll, a handheld wobble transforming into a locked-off shot. Mid-sentence, a continuity miracle that only happens when time is obedient. She called a metadata analyst she trusts and confirmed a mismatch between the corridor security camera clock and the phone captured on screen. This wasn't the smoking gun. It was the schematic of the weapon. She drafted her piece with verbs that don't swagger, then paused, because truth without context can still draw blood. Inside Truth Loop HQ, victory felt suspiciously like vertigo. The metrics were obscene in the way roller coasters are terrifying, addictive, and built to make you forget gravity. Rocco paced between screens, muttering about follow-ups. He wanted closure, content, before the crowd discovered the exit. Maya scrolled comments that praised her courage and sliced her with side-eye in the same breath. Lena stared at a paused frame where a boom mic grazed the top edge, a ghost of process that I'd hoped you wouldn't see. Conscience doesn't announce its arrival. It flickers, leaves a taste of metal, turns your wrists to glass. When a DM from a fact-checker landed, Rocco called it clout chasing. When a second came from Priya with specific questions, the room pulsed quieter. Someone switched off the music. It is hard to hear doubt over applause until you try. Elias retreated to the one place where noise becomes pattern. A rehearsal room with bad acoustics and honest walls. He laid his phone face down and played the same progression until it sounded like its own alibi. Between chords, he recorded a rough statement. No background music. No trembling strings, just the calendar, the set time, the Uber receipt, the friend who can place him across town. He knew how this looks, he said. Because looking is all anyone is doing. He asked for the raw files. He asked for a pause. He asked, more than anything, to not be reduced to a thumbnail. But the internet doesn't have brakes. It has back buttons. Still, he sent the statement to Priya and Zoe, then waited as if patience could be a strategy. Outside, a car alarm wailed and cut, like a crowd deciding whether to keep shouting. Cracks don't announce themselves. They glint when the light hits wrong. Priya's draft stayed private, but her notebook filled with small rebellions, a shadow moving left, while a body moves right, a door that sighs shut twice without reopening. A hotel carpet pattern that doesn't match the chain. They doesn't match the chain. Credited, she called the property manager and learned the corridor paint had changed months earlier, that the video wore yesterday's color like a mask. Then there was the phone clock caught in reflection, stubbornly insisting on a minute that the main camera refused to admit. She traced the angles over and over until the footage felt like a stage set with a secret exit. This wasn't about absolving anyone. It was about the cardinal sin of storytelling, pretending the cut is the truth. Priya stared at her screen, cursor blinking, and decided the next step was old-fashioned. Knock, ask record. Inside Truth Loop Studio, the high of virality curdled into watchfulness. Lena watched the paused frame where a boom tip grazed heaven and felt the slow leak of certainty. She'd built this timeline like a cathedral, layers of cuts, a choir of sound design, but the hymn no longer sounded like belief. She approached Rocco with a technical question, disguised as a truce. Why does camera B pick up the corridor at an angle camera A can't see unless there was a reset? He waved it off with the language of hustlers. Coverage, redundancy, run-and-gun magic. Maya stayed silent, eyes on her phone, nodding to comments that praised her bravery and condemned her tone in the same breath. Lena opened the RAW folder and found a clip labeled Alt Confess, date stamped an hour before the surprise. She closed it like it could burn her. Zoe tried to hold two truths in the same hand and felt them cut her palms. The video showed a corridor with Elias drifting past the door like a guilty comet. Her memory showed a night of raiment and silence while he tuned a borrowed guitar for the next day's set. Between them lay a cliff, built from strangers' certainty. She scrolled Priya's previous investigations, calm, unlovely, allergic to drama, and messaged a single question. Would you look at one thing? She sent a photo of Elias's denim jacket on a chair, a stain on the cuff visible in his rehearsal clip but missing in the hotel footage. It was thin ice, not proof. Still, it was ice that held her for a breath. When Priya responded with measured curiosity, Zoe felt the first unspooling of a knot that had seemed permanent. Doubt arrived the way rot does. Quiet, then everywhere. A tech forum clipped the corridor and argued about lens distortion versus impossible geometry. A small creator with 40K subscribers posted a side-by-side. The security cam timestamp is synchronized by a ghostly minute. In comment sections, the temperature shifted from bonfire to sauna. Still hot, less oxygen. Reaction channels hedged, mastering the art of the non-apology hypothesis. If this were staged, big if, it would be devastating. Brands edited their posts from "We stand with survivors" to "We stand with truth." Evidence of how quickly virtue can be rebranded. For the first time, the phrase "trial by timeline" trended without a punchline, and inside Truth Loop's mentions lurked a new kind of threat. Not your heroes, not your monsters, but show the raws. The crowd that built the gallows now wanted blueprints. The message hit Priya's encrypted inbox at 2:13 a.m. subject line. Not safe on email. The body contained a location, a time, and a condition. No cameras until we talk. She arrived to find a parking garage humming with fluorescent loneliness. The source stepped from a stairwell, wearing a cap too low and guilt too high. Former crew, 3 shoots with Truth Loop, paid late and praised early. They didn't offer absolution. They offered a drive, palm-sized and heavy with consequence. We rehearsed the corridor, they said, voice frayed. Insurance. In case he didn't show. The word insurance hung like a bad chord. Priya breathed, counted to 3, and asked for permission to record. The source nodded. Somewhere above them, a car door slammed, ordinary and enormous. She knew then the story had crossed from suspicion to math. The drive opened like a confession booth with a cue. Raw clips breathed in their own messy way. Room tone, nervous laughter. A collapsed slate where there shouldn't be one. The corridor existed twice, once with a shaky approach, once with a line reading nailed on take 3. A man off camera said, "Mark," and a woman repeated her prompt like a stage manager. On another file, a hand placed a hotel key card into a frame, pulled it back, placed it again, as if teaching the moment how to be memorable. The line that was sold as a confession unraveled into fragments. Demo takes dressed in righteous strings later. Priya noted the time codes that refused to be bullied, circled the take where the surprise door already knew when to creak. Evidence didn't shout. It stacked, quiet and tall. She drafted the headline she didn't want to write. The sting was rehearsed. Priya requested comment and arrived with a recorder that looked more like a mirror. In Truth Loop's studio, the plants were curated, the trophies reflective, and the air conditioned to confidence. Rocco went first, talking in circles shaped like a strategy deck, multiple sources, editorial standards, industry practices that apparently included fate cooperating with their coverage. Maya's eyes flicked between Priya and an invisible audience. She spoke about bravery, safety, community, words that tasted fine until you swallowed them with receipts. Lena watched the waveform bloom on Priya's phone and finally let a sentence escape. Quarantine. The corridor had contingencies. She said it softly, as if sound might bruise it. Rocco called it safety coverage. Maya called it narrative continuity. And the room called it what it sounded like when Truth was asked to dance on Mark's tape to a floor. The planted witness stepped into daylight and looked taller without the script. Their name was Jill Morton, a freelancer who did background gigs and rent math. In a quiet cafe, Jill traced the way Truth had been explained to them. Show up, describe a corridor encounter that might happen later, sign an NDA that cared more about spoilers than accuracy. They admitted the line about seeing Elias slip in alone came from a text Rocco sent with suggested phrasing. They hadn't meant harm, they said. They meant invoices. Priya didn't offer absolution. She offered clarity, and clarity made Jael tremble with relief and fear in equal parts. When the camera red light blinked, Jael repeated the only line that mattered. Now it was staged to survive scrutiny long enough to monetize. The sentence landed like a switch, flipped on the room. When Priya's piece published, the internet didn't gasp. It recalibrated. Threads that once hissed certainty now coughed up caveats. A platform labeled the original sting with a context-added banner that looked like a band-aid on a billboard. Brands rewrote statements using the same nouns rearranged into caution. Reaction channels sprinted to the moral middle, issuing apologies that apologized mostly for being early. Truth Loop posted a notes app square framed by a tasteful gradient, invoking safety, intent, and the complexity of storytelling in a hostile world. The metric curve inverted, comments shifted to demands. Release all RAWs, donate revenue, apologize to those collateralized for content. People who had marched in the pile-on now marched in a different direction, proving that velocity is not the same as conscience. For the first time since upload, silence seemed like a viable choice. Elias met Zoe on a park bench where the city sounded like it remembered how to breathe. Between them sat a folder, receipts, a set list, a photo of the jacket sleeve with the stubborn paint smudge. He didn't rehearse this part. He told her the ordinary truth of that night. The call he missed. The door he never touched. The sleep that had felt like escape. She didn't offer instant absolution. She offered a truce with time. They agreed on 2 actions that felt almost radical. Online. Ask for all the raw footage through counsel, and speak only once, with verifiable facts and no soundtrack. Priya's text buzzed with a single line. Jail, on record, and they both exhaled like a verdict had been delayed, not delivered. The storm hadn't passed, but the sky finally had seams instead of pure glare. Backlash doesn't arrive as a singular wave. It breaks into rips that pull everyone sideways. The same accounts that once crowned Truth Loop as guardians now screenshots their own comments with captions like, "We were misled." Threads surface with timestamps of harassment, baristas, ticket takers, a stagehand whose only crime was handing Elias a bottle of water, each posting receipts of DMs that bruised in private first. A teacher's PTA email lands online, misread as evidence, and a stranger drives by her house to film the wrong front door. The crowd, thirsty for penance, sips from any cup that looks like it might spill. Brands retract their moral proclamations with corporate origami, folding outrage into miscommunication. The sting isn't just a video anymore. It's a map of collateral damage, names circled by people who don't know them. And in the vacuum where certainty used to roar, a quieter consensus forms. Harm done for clicks is still harm, even if the thumbnail glowed with virtue. Inside Truth Loop's office, the scramble is part triage, part theater. Rocco drafts a thread about industry standards and consults a lawyer who prefers verbs like indemnify and mitigate. He rehearses blame the way he once rehearsed corridors, auditioning phrases that redirect heat toward post-production decisions. Lena, who knows exactly which decisions were hers and which were orders, reads the draft and feels the ground tilt. Maya suggests a pause and is handed a bullet list titled Talking Points, All Certainty and No Oxygen. A demand letter goes out to Pariah's publication, stiff paper meant to stiffen spines, but screenshots of clap slates and duplicate takes don't negotiate. They exist. In a private Slack, someone types, "We'll say our editor went rogue," and the cursor blinks like a metronome counting down to betrayal. Loyalty is tested in public. Scapegoating is arranged in private, where the cameras finally, mercifully, aren't rolling. Demonetization doesn't sound like a gavel. It's a soft yellow icon that shaves income in silence. Sponsors slide out of DMs with phrases like brand safety and reputational risk, the cordial language of doors closing. A merch partner pauses fulfillment, and the comment section turns into a focus group for ethics. Reaction channels, smelling smoke, pivot to meta coverage, how we all got played, which is a magic trick that turns complicity into content. Meanwhile, creators who once stitched the corridor now stitch their own disclaimers onto old uploads, as if retroactive caution could rewrite the timeline. The algorithm doesn't have a conscience, only incentives. It gently escorts the sting down the feed while elevating its autopsy. For Truth Loop, the graph looks like altitude sickness. For everyone caught in their wake, the air is clearer but colder, and visibility makes the shiver worse. Lena chooses a risk that feels like relief. She forwards an internal email chain to Priya. Subject lines that evolve from coverage to contingency to insurance, each more honest than the last. She includes a calendar invite titled Rehearsal Corridor. Its casualness a bruise. The cost arrives within hours. A doxing thread surfaces her old address. A grainy yearbook photo becomes a dartboard. Rocco texts a single sentence that pretends to be concern. Legal says you should reconsider. Priya, practiced at living in crosswinds, publishes with care, redacting numbers and shielding unrelated names. She also includes a section called Collateral, a ledger of ordinary people turned into content unwillingly. The story stops being about whether a corridor was real and becomes about what a crowd believes it is allowed to do when given a story that hurts beautifully. Elias watches the pendulum swing and refuses to celebrate the arc. Vindication Online arrives, laced with spite. He wants neither. He meets his booking agent, who apologizes for the cancellations in a voice that sounds like weather. He visits the stagehand, who took the worst of the crowd's imaginative violence, and apologizes for a storm he didn't summon but still stood beneath. Zoe helps him draft a statement that doesn't gloat, doesn't score, doesn't declare enemies. Just lists verifiable times, places, and debts owed to those dragged into the ring. The internet prefers finales, but real life hands out aftermaths. He sends the statement to Priya to host alongside the receipts, keeping his own channels quiet for once. Some followers leave, bored by the absence of spectacle. Others stay, learning how to sit with a story that doesn't reward them for watching. Apologies arrived like trailers for movies that would never premiere. 2 minutes of music, 4 minutes of synonyms for sorry, and 0 minutes of naming what exactly was done. Maya sat before ficus and soft daylight and spoke about intention. The way sailors talk about stars while ignoring the reef. Rocco chose the car interior, confession, seatbelt on, gravity simulated by a parked vehicle. He said the process failed them, as if process were a weather pattern had merely been rained on. Lena uploaded last, voice thin but honest, refusing the euphemisms and saying the corridor had takes. The comments split into familiar teams, wounded forgiveness, gleeful punishment, and the pragmatists who only asked for refunds on their righteousness. What was once a united chant turned into overlapping solos, each pitched to be heard above the rest. And yet, in every feed, the same phantom hovered, a boom mic that still wouldn't leave the fray. Sponsors didn't cancel. They evaporated. Contracts speaking in warm adjectives cooled into clauses, and the math of reputation quietly outvoted the poetry of partnership. A streaming platform flagged the sting as manipulated media, a category designed for problems no one thought to name until they needed the drawer. Legal letters pinged like hail on a tin roof, some threatening, some pleading, all heavy with the inertia of people who mistook paperwork for absolution. Priya's piece grew an appendix of updates, retractions, corrections, timelines revised under pressure. In boardrooms, brand stewards rehearsed the new gospel: caution over courage, distance over dialogue, while public statements wore the calm smile of furniture catalogs. Truth Loop's DMs filled with refund demands and essay-length essays about trust. The audience hadn't left. It had changed its posture, crossing its arms the way a crowd does when it's done being dazzled. Inside the studio, silence learned choreography. The humming fridge, the whir of a hard drive, the click of a pen, each sound took turns pretending to be momentum. Rocco pitched a comeback arc that tasted like Rust Transparency series, live audits, a doc about rebuilding trust. Maya stared at the whiteboard where accountability appeared in a font that made it look like a brand. Lena said the quiet thing with volume: you can't rebuild trust on the same floor marks where you staged confession. The sentence left a dent. Old messages surfaced in the shared drive like fossils, beat sheets, time code jokes, a selfie captioned, "Take 3. Truth." Laughter, once a bonding agent, came back as evidence. They tried to plan a hiatus but discovered you can't schedule absence. It either happens to you or you choose it. For the first time, choice seemed heavier than consequence. Platforms love policy most when it looks like progress. After the storm, a new guideline appeared with the calm certainty of a road sign label: staged confrontations. Disclose reenactments, provide raw timestamps upon challenge. It read like common sense and felt like history retrofitted with guardrails. Priya recorded a segment that refused triumph. She mapped the harm, the incentives, and the way attention launders intention when money is involved. She interviewed a moderator who described triging outrage as a kind of weather report: gusts of certainty, chance of doxing, visibility poor. Jael spoke again, less afraid this time, outlining the economics of being almost visible online. The point wasn't punishment. It was precedent. If stories could be built like sets, maybe audiences could be trained to look for exits before the fire drill began. Reckoning is rarely cinematic. It is a series of small rooms and honest chairs. Elias and Zoe met in one. No cameras, no counsel, just a list of what happened and what almost did. They spoke about boundaries like they were blueprints, not barricades. He admitted the pride that kept him from asking for help when speculation sprouted. She admitted the algorithmic gravity that pulled her heart towards certainty. They agreed to separate their private repair from public appetite, to keep receipts for their own memory rather than for performance. Across town, Maya texted Lena, not with strategy, but with a question that sounded like surrender. What does repair look like if we stop filming it? Lena replied with a time and a place and no agenda. Outside, the city continued, indifferent and sane. The feeds slowed, not because the story ended, but because it finally refused to perform. Mediation didn't look like redemption. It looked like a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and toner. A neutral attorney translated fury into bullet points: retract, disclose, compensate. Priya attended as an observer. The way a historian stands near a battlefield after the cannons have been wheeled away. Truthloop's counsel proposed a restorative content fund, a phrase that tried to turn apology into program. Elias asked for something less theatrical: pay the people harmed, publish the raws, and state plainly that the corridor was staged. Zoe requested a clause that barred surprise confrontations from being marketed as journalism. Everyone signed something measured and inadequate, because paper can only hold what people will risk saying aloud. Outside, the sidewalk felt different. No chorus, no pitch. When the doors opened, the story stepped out smaller and truer, like a costume removed to reveal ordinary skin. Platforms codified the bruise. The update wasn't a manifesto. It was a checklist: disclose reenactments, retain raw timecodes for independent review, clearly label dramatizations, suspend accounts that weaponize staged accusations. Reaction channels gamified compliance with badges that glimmered under thumbnails like seatbelts. A few protested that rules kill spontaneity. Others admitted that spontaneity had been covering for scripts. Priya hosted a roundtable with creators who had built careers on outrage and now spoke the careful dialect of reform. The subtext was simple: you can still have a climax, just don't manufacture the crime. Audiences learned to ask different questions, and asking felt less like treason. The market discovered an unsexy truth: transparency retains better than scandal once refunds are part of the calculus. What changed first wasn't virtue. It was incentives, which is often how culture learns to behave. Truthloop's rebrand arrived without confetti. The new channel trailer promised process videos, audits, and interviews with people they had previously turned into archetypes. Rocco appeared smaller in the frame, as if distance could humble a lens. Maya read acknowledgments that didn't try to rhyme. Lena posted a technical breakdown titled, "How We Cheated You." And it was the first upload that sounded like a person, not a pitch. Comments refused to move in one direction. Some welcomed contrition. Some demanded exile. Many left in silence, which hurts differently from hate. The trio debated shutting it all down, but closure felt like an indulgence purchased with other people's pain. So they stayed and paid. Literal money to those they harmed, and the slower currency of changed behavior. It wasn't a comeback. It was an aftercare plan for an audience I'd taught to distrust them. Elias returned to stage, the way people return to kitchens after a fire, wary, grateful, aware of where the exits live. The first song wasn't about the scandal. It was about a night bus and a streetlight that blinked like an old friend. Between tracks, he said he'd learned that silence can be dignity, not defeat. Zoe's art show opened the next week, canvases layered with small rectangles, windows, thumbnails, proof that attention has geometry. In a corner, a placard read, "Not everything filmed needs a villain." Priya attended both, taking notes not for a piece but for memory, the kind that doesn't require links. The crowd's applause felt human instead of algorithmic. It swelled and fell without seeking an ad break. For once, no one raised a phone during the quiet song. The moment existed only where it happened, which is to say, it existed. In the end, a lesson resisted slogans. Vigilante virality promises justice at the speed of a swipe, but what it usually delivers is a cast list with the wrong protagonist. The sting that crowned heroes manufactured a villain and became its own monster. Because choreography in the costume of conscience is still choreography. Accountability, it turns out, is quieter than spectacle. It is receipts kept without intention to post. It is timelines checked before torches are lit. It is the courage to let a story be complicated and therefore true. If you need a rule for the feed, take this one whenever a video gives you a perfect target and a perfect soundtrack. Pause. Ask what was rehearsed. By them, by you, by the machine. Then choose what to share like it could become someone's biography. Because it might. That's not a finale. That's a way to live online without becoming the villain of someone else's plot.